welcome to This Is Horror.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, Bob.
So, to begin with, I want to talk about what some of the early life lessons were that you learned growing up in California.
Well, I don't think you learn any life lessons growing up in California. No, that's interesting question, one that I've never been asked before. So kudos to that. Um, you know, People assume that if you are born and raised in Los Angeles, as I was, that you've got connections to the industry and that you know people who work in it who can give you advice, give you life lessons, that sort of thing. Not the case. No one in my family or in my circle of acquaintances was in the business as I was growing up in LA. And basically, the life lesson is to not allow yourself to be cowed by impossibility. There was just the idea that I couldn't do it didn't stop me from doing it. You write because you have to write. If you're a writer, you write because you can't not write. You put the work into it in the hopes of doing good work, not in the hopes of being successful. And, in my case, uh, I was very lucky to have some important people like the work that I did and want to work with me. And in getting agents and representatives who were interested in handling and thinking they can make money off of me and thereby making me a good living. But mainly it's to just be naive enough to not realize how impossible this job can be to be able to make a life in it. It's about luck and timing and ability in equal measure. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that answers that question.
No, I think there's a lot to go off there. And I think naivety helps a lot of us within the
Yeah,
creative industry because if you were really told the reality to begin with, you probably wouldn't get into it. But it's a combination of naivety and just absolute love and passion for the genre and for creativity.
exactly. And passion is what it's all about because, for me, I was 33 before I started making my living as a screenwriter, and it was working for Steven Spielberg on Amazing Stories. So I had been writing, seriously writing, since I was 12 years old. So it only took me 21 years to make a living off of it. And you don't do it for free for 21 years unless you just really love it and can't not do it. Because if you're
Right.
doing it to become successful, you're going to give up pretty quick.
Yeah. I mean, if people do this to get rich, there are quicker ways. There are much quicker ways. And, that there's such a small percentage of us who do get rich doing it anyway.
Yeah, and of course, there's the old joke of the would-be actress who was so eager to make it that she slept with the screenwriter. So,
Yeah. Fatal mistake there. But I mean, if we look before you were even writing, so I mean, you said you started writing at 12 years old, but what were your first experiences with horror films and horror stories? When, to use a cliche, were you bitten by that horror bug?
I was always the oddball who loved horror from the time I was a little kid. One of the first movie I remember seeing was Son of Kong on television, and I was totally captivated by it. Then the whole Universal horror package with my local TV station. I discovered monsters and I ate them up. And then I discovered the monsters who are us rather than made out of body parts or kaiju creatures or, Freddy Krueger's and the like. The ones that scared me the most were the ones that didn't look like monsters. Norman Bates as opposed to the Wolfman, that sort of thing. But I was bitten by it at a very early age. That I was probably 5 or 6 years old, watching Son of Kong, and I was the only one in the family. I had three siblings, my mother and father. None of them were particularly drawn to the genre, but I was the quiet, weird kid who was also class clown and loved monster movies.
And I mean, if we look at your career, I mean, you said that there's been a lot of luck, but in a way, it all makes sense. It's all almost as if it was meticulously crafted. But then, of course, talking to you and hearing about how things went, I mean, you were what, working on the reception for Star Wars Corporation when things really started to come into play for you, and you were hosting an interview show, Fantasy Film Festival, through
Right.
contacts that you had made. So luck is maybe a little bit disingenuous because you really were working hard. You were taking advantage of opportunities. You were creating them.
Well, that's true, but you still need the luck to come from without as well as from within. And the opportunity, the fact that they were looking for a receptionist at Star Wars at the time, a friend of mine, a journalist I worked with at the time, um, said, "Yeah, I heard that they need somebody over at Star Wars. You should meet with them." And I went over that day, and they hired me that day. And so that was my entree into actually making a living in the film business. Not much of a living, a meager living, but a living nonetheless. So luck is a good part of it, but luck also relies upon your ability to make of it what you can. And I don't mean for that to mean exploiting it, but in seizing on opportunities as they open themselves up to you.
And so, do you think even from an early age, you have been someone who has been able to successfully identify when there is an opportunity?
Sometimes, sometimes, not all the time, but you know, the opportunity, for example, when I was making of the Goonies up in Oregon I was interviewing Steven Spielberg on the porch of the house location that they were shooting at that day, the very first day of shooting. And Steven said to me, "You must do a lot of these things," because he had been on my TV interview show on the Z channel. And so he had known me before that a little. And so I said what I never would have said today if I had known was, actually, I'm trying to make a go of it as a writer. But the timing third of the pie was that he said to me, "Oh, really? We're looking for writers for this new show I'm creating called Amazing Stories." And so at that time in Los Angeles, one of his readers on the staff of Amazing Stories read a spec script of mine that my agent had submitted and wrote wildly positive notes about it, recommending me as a writer for Amazing Stories. And I found out years later that I was the first screenwriter hired to write for Amazing Stories. And it was because Stephen had said that at that moment. I had said that at that moment. And the timing, luck, timing, and the ability to fulfill what people were looking for at that time happened to coincide. And it was a very happy accident.
And around that time as well, I mean, that was when you then kind of started doing work on Psycho 4, I believe, which
Oh,
then,
it was a lot earlier than it was way
right.
before Psycho 4. This was 77 when I was working for Star Wars. And then working on Amazing Stories was 85, 86, 87. And then Psycho 4 was after Critters 2. So
Ah, okay.
a lot of projects with numbers in the title, so easily to get confused.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have all these notes in front of me. It's like a kind of maze, a tapestry of your career.
Well, I know years by project. So I know Critters 2 was 1988, Psycho 4 was 1990. It was made for the Showtime pay TV network, which was a way distant second to HBO. And the reviews were pretty completely awful in 1990. But there were a handful of them that were great. And Stephen King was sent two movies by two directors, myself and another unnamed director. They were both made for television movies. And King had director approval. And so they were very close to hiring me, and they ended up hiring the other director. So that other director started rewriting Stephen King. And when you have a project that you want Stephen King's name in the title, it's a bad idea to rewrite that and go completely elsewhere from another screenwriter's ideas. So they ended up changing horses, and I got a reprieve and was able to work with King on Sleepwalkers after he had seen Psycho 4 and was very supportive of it.
And I mean, Sleepwalkers is a bold film. There are things that to understate it. And I mean, even just kind of up front to have a boy sleeping with his mother just very casually, and the gore, the violence for the time, just the balls to the wall nature of it. I mean, how aware of you were you what you had kind of on your hands there when you were making it?
Oh, and it was a studio film too, not an independent movie.
Right,
So
yeah.
when I read the script, I thought, this is going to be fun. But it was so outrageous. At the time, the head of the studio said, nobody's going to make a movie here at this studio with a boy having sex with his mother as long as I'm here. Well, halfway through our production, he'd been booted out and replaced by another studio head. So I knew that we were doing something strong and we were doing something different, but I didn't realize just how convention breaking the film was until after it was done, and we test screened it with an audience, and the reactions. Well, on opening night, for example, at the Chinese theater, 1,200 seat theater, packed to the gills, and when mother and son are dancing together, and finally, at the end of the dance, he says, "Oh, mother," kisses her deeply and carries her up the stairs and into the bedroom and slamming the door in the camera's face. Everyone in the audience went, "Ew!" And they were so like shocked by the whole thing. And I was so delighted. I knew that we'd done something people weren't used to seeing. And to this day, I feel like we made a movie that's not like any other movie I've seen.
Yeah, it's definitely different. The first time I saw it was, I think, probably on Showtime. Uh, when- but I was intrigued because Alice Creek was in it, and I remember her from Ghost Story.
Which
And
is
I
why
was
I
like,
cast her, because I loved her so much in Ghost Story.
and she is just fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I'm watching this movie, and it's like it's wild. I'm like, this I ain't seen nothing like this. And then we have this massive forensic scene with just like a hall of fame, of people, and it's just like, whoa, there's wow, holy what the hell. And it's like they must have just been hanging out partying, and he said, hey, come on, let's get in the scene. I mean, I have no idea, I've never made a movie, but that was just amazing. And for such a wild a wild movie, that, I mean, to me, I feel like it's a classic today, even though people might go, ugh, but yeah, it's crazy. You can't.
Well, I don't know. It's a little too much in the gutter to be a classic, I guess, for most people. But I tend to live in that gutter and revel in it. But it was so much fun. And that forensic scene you're talking about, it's all one shot. And you could easily cut that shot out and not affect the storytelling in the slightest. You wouldn't
Right.
miss it, except Google Gobble, those of us, we would miss it because we're the ones who would recognize Stephen King and Clive Barker and Toby Hooper. And that was also one of the great things on opening night at the Chinese Theater, hearing the horrorgensia in the audience going, "That's Stephen King, hey, that's Clive Barker, hey, that's Toby Hooper." So it was a blast. And then, of course, John Landis and Joe Dante later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned King and Barker and Landis, and I feel that these are perhaps three of the most instrumental and important friendships that you've had within your career. So, I mean, what what was it like initially connecting with each of them, and then what have you learnt from each?
Well, I've learned something from every filmmaker I've ever been around, even doing the Postmortem podcast. We did 180 interviews, I think. And every one of them I genuinely learned something from. John Landis, I knew first. I was working on Star Wars in the office next door to his office when he was prepping Animal House. And so I learned about individuality from John. There's nobody like John. And the sense of humor, and he's also where I got the idea of putting friends who were filmmakers into cameo roles. Most of his movies, he does the same thing. And it's because directors don't work together. And to be able to be on somebody's set with one of your friends who is either a peer or not a peer or does the same work as you do at a different level or otherwise. And it's a lot of fun to have moral support from your friends. And it helps make a very difficult job a little less difficult. You know, you're working a 12 to 15 hour day, and it leavens things slightly. But, you know, from Clive, I learned how to be completely uncensored and uninhibited creatively. From King, the idea that, you know, not to hold back, because I would always, with my work, I would be too careful. And I learned not to be so careful from these people that don't. I think a writer is the job of being a writer is being very bold. It's being able to lay yourself bare to an audience, use yourself, put yourself in all of your characters, and be fearless about representing all of the worst things or most fearful things about your personality, about your experience, about who you are. And those are things that I learned from those people. Toby Hooper is another one of those people who is a ferociously creative individual who, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre shows almost nothing graphically, but you don't feel like it when you watch the movie. You are wrung out and hung up to dry after you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So those things, I'm a very gentle of nature person, but in the work that I do, it touches places that are in me that don't get out very often. So that's what art does for you. And a lot of people would argue that what we do is not art, but I would argue that it is. So
Yeah, I think the vast majority of us, in this game and people listening would argue adamantly against those people, or maybe we just wouldn't talk to them. It's like if that's your position, we're not even going to have that conversation.
yeah, this is horror after all.
Right. That's it. And I mean, when we look at something like Sleepwalkers, or we look at The Stand or Desperation, I want to know, how do you approach adapting a story for the screen? And we're really interested in the craft at This Is Horror, so we'd love to know the steps and the process from reading the initial story to writing the first draft and then turning in the final draft.
Well, the good news is that Stephen King wrote those scripts, so that helped a lot. But still, making it something physical instead of something that's entirely on a page and in your mind is deciding on a style, something that can be consistent with the theme of the movie, of the book, And you're trying to satisfy, especially with something like The Stand, which was King's best-selling novel of all time. You don't want to fuck that up. You want to satisfy the fans, but not disappoint people who aren't familiar with it. And so it's a very difficult tightrope to walk. But I'm as big a fan as anybody else out there. So I'm making it in the hopes that it's going to be the best thing I can not just make, but that I can watch. I want to see this movie as badly as you do. And then it's deciding on a physical style, what kind of lenses you're going to use. I don't like to use lenses that the eye sees, the 35 millimeter lens. I'd rather use a wide angle lens and a long lens so that you're seeing something either in very deep focus where everything with a wide angle lens, you see the world around you. And that's the best production value you can have, is a great location that you can show expansively. Or a long lens where you've got a shallow depth of field, you've got soft focus in front of and behind. And so those are a couple of technical elements that can help you decide how to build tension and what your visuals are like. You create a color palette. What are you trying to best put across? Is it layers of red that have an emotional content that's very high, or layers of blue or earth tones, or everything has an emotional tone to it. Every color has an emotional tone. And then it's, what can you afford? Who are the actors? How do they bring it to life in ways unexpected and hoped for at the same time? What are the visual effects going to be? How do you approach them? How can you make them as practical as possible? Something like The Stand, we didn't have much in the way of digital opportunities, and the ones we used were very primitive and not very satisfying. But you had to work with what you had. But we had practical makeup effects and other effects that were spectacular, that Steve Johnson's XFX did. And so it's really starting from page one, getting your production designer, your director of photography, your cast, your casting director, all of these people, getting them all together to share the same vision. So that's the hope. That's the starting place.
Right. Yeah. And
When I'm writing, it's different because, if I'm adapting Stephen King or Clive Barker, I'm trying to be as faithful to that as I can while knowing I'm working in a different medium. What you read is not the same as what you see. And you can feel things from movies, sound and picture, that you can't convey in books. And in books, you can convey things internal that you can't convey from an external medium like film. So it's, again, the tightrope continues.
And we're jumping all over the place with the topics, but as you're mentioning, the difference between the story and the film, that can bring us to Masters of Horror and your short story Chocolate, because the story in Life in Cinema
Yeah.
is very, well, I was going to say it's very different. It's obviously tonally and structurally there are similarities, but
Yeah, but it stops halfway through.
well, this is it, yeah. So I'd love to know about your approach for that one.
Well, originally I was going to turn Chocolate into a feature film, and it almost went several times, but the timing was not right. The sex in movies was going out of fashion at the time that the story was written. So it was something that wasn't going to happen for that reason. When we did Masters of Horror, I thought, this is a horror story. And a lot of horror fans don't see it as a horror story because there's no monsters or serial killers or anything. It's more a sexual nightmare that becomes fatal. But it was originally going to be a 90-minute feature. It was a 100-page screenplay. And I decided to crunch it because I knew we had 1 hour to make our movies. And a lot of the Masters of Horror episodes were originally conceived as features, but were brought down to the 1 hour mark. And so I thought, well, let's do a lot of slashing and burning here. And because I wrote the short story and I wrote the original script, I'm not going to piss anybody off by changing anything. I can just root around in there as much as I want because it's going to be my baby. And so it was a blast adapting it for Masters of Horror and then actually shooting it with a couple of actors I'd worked with before who became really good friends, Henry Thomas and Matt Frewer. And so that was just a great experience. But yeah, you're right. It was the ability to take my own material and mess with it however I wanted to. But in season 2, I wrote the screenplay for my episode based on a story by Clive Barker, an original story, not a published story, that he had given me for the show. And so the story he gave me was so long, we'd still be shooting it if I shot the whole thing 20 years later. But so there was a lot of wiggle room there where I could take it because it was so expansive. And Clive and I are very good friends, and he was really, I would always take him the drafts as I complete them, and Clive, here, what do you think? And he was always very supportive. So that always went really well. And the same with King. He's never told me how I should or shouldn't change any of his work. He's always been very supportive of how it's turned out.
Yeah, and the Clive Barker story, Valerie on the Stairs, I mean, that's such a delightful and disquieting piece, and there's just so much discomfort and paranoia throughout. And
Oh, good.
that final act, though, it's like a Spinal Tap said, that's when you turn it up to 11. It's like, holy shit, we're bringing all the elements together. But it's got to be one of my favorite Masters of Horror episodes. But
Oh, thank you.
even saying that the standard is so consistently high with every Masters of Horror.
We were very lucky, and we had a great crew. We got great directors who knew how to work on a budget and a schedule, who had great ideas, and we really lucked out. We did 2 seasons, and there are 26 episodes, and I love them all, for different reasons. And I'm very proud of what we did, and I think we achieved what nobody thought we could, and it turned out great. The show was a big success for Showtime. They just didn't want to pay for it anymore. So it didn't continue. But who knows? But I really appreciate you saying that. But there's some really wonderful episodes. Being at a film festival and watching Chocolate play, a film festival in Italy, watching Chocolate play with an audience, and Dario Argento standing up at the end with the crowd afterwards. But even more than that, Joe Dante's episode about the Iraq War had a 10-minute standing ovation at this Italian film festival. And it was not a genre festival. It was an artsy, mainstream artsy film festival that attracted the intelligentsia of cinema rather than the horror agencia. So that was unbelievably fulfilling, and Joe was just blown away.
Mm-hmm. It's like growing up. I grew up, so I'm 58. So I saw, the Tor horror, leisure books, Del Abyss. When Del Abyss came out, it was the top notch. And so then Masters of Horror, to me, is the Del Abyss of films. And that, to me, that's like, you can't, in other words, like a whole series dedicated to horror. And every story even if it took a familiar trope, it turned it inside out. And that's to me, it's like you can't get any higher than that. Del Abyss in fiction, they revolutionized horror. And Masters of Horror, I think people are they should be still influenced by that series.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's nice when you've got Clive Barker, you've got Toby Hooper, you've got John Carpenter, you've got Stuart Gordon, you've got all of these great people, many of whom have passed, and to have been able to have either their last films or their nearly their last films, and to show that they could still pull it off
Mm-hmm.
was really honorific, you know.
Yeah, my understanding is that it started because you organized Masters of Horror dinners. So, can you talk us a little bit through how you went from having dinners with these Masters of Horror to putting out these amazing 2 seasons?
Sure, you know, we filmmakers would run into each other at Directors Guild organizations or meetings or film festivals around the world. And everyone would always say, "Oh, we ought to all get together for dinner sometime," you know. And it's like, "Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great." And I realized nobody's actually going to take the bull by the horns and do it, so I'm going to. And it took me a week to put together the first dinner to try and get a time that was convenient for everybody to make it. There were 12 people at the first dinner. It was Wes Craven and Toby Hooper and Stuart Gordon and John Carpenter and John Landis and William Malone, and you know, there were 12. Guillermo del Toro. And we had a really great time. And we were right next to a party celebrating somebody's birthday. And so they stood up and started singing Happy Birthday. We all joined in. And at the end, Guillermo del Toro stood up and said, "The Masters of Horror wish you a happy birthday." So that was where it began. And then, because everybody had such a good time, the next one I put together, was a couple of months later, and it took an hour to arrange it. And so, you know, it's just like any people who have the same job in common. You talk about work, you get together for a dinner. It's not all about work, it's just about friendship, fellowship. You know, some of it's about work, some of it's about play, some of it's just about whatever is going on in each other's lives. And one of the things that we talked about was having the ability to be in control of our own creative lives, to be able to make what we want to make, not to do the fifth sequel to some franchise that's been hanging, rotting on the vine. And so I came up with the idea of doing this anthology series and saying, if you want to buy this, you have to agree to give everybody their heads. Now, obviously, we don't want to do things that are illegal or things that are unsavory to ourselves, but we want the creative freedom to do that. Yeah, you can get John Carpenter and Toby Hooper and Stuart Gordon, but you have to give them their creative heads. So that was our pitch. We pitched to 3 different companies. The first one was Anchor Bay. And they said, "How much and when can we start?" And we were off and running. And it was amazing. And they licensed it to Showtime. It was never originally going to be a TV show, it was going to be direct to DVD. And then they realized at Anchor Bay that if it were a television series on a network, that would be the best commercial for the show itself, that you'd sell a lot of DVDs. So Showtime licensed it for 10% of the cost of the show being made. So they paid so little for it that they couldn't have any creative input. And so that was how that was born. And then we did it for 2 years, and then Anchor Bay was sold to Starz, and Starz decided they wanted twice as much money, and they sold it to NBC, which was a commercial network with censorship and all of that. And so that's how Fear Itself came about. And I was attached at first, but once the creative control and the censorship and all of that became an issue, I left the show. And it went on without me and failed miserably, I'm happy to say. So,
And when it came to those original pitches to Anchor Bay, who was in the room for the pitch and what did you pitch at the time? I mean, did you have to kind of give them the premise for a number of episodes, or was it as simple as, look, we're talking John Carpenter, we're talking Dario Argento, this is the pitch?
that was the pitch. It was me
Yeah.
in the room with Anchor Bay saying, look, because I wasn't only pitching the directors, I was pitching writers as well, and writers of material that it would be based on. So you either got it or you didn't. And a lot of these people were horror fans, at Anchor Bay in particular, because most of their business was horror movies. And the budget we were working at that time, 20 years ago, it was $2 million an episode, 10 days of shooting for the most part. And it's a very low budget, not a terrible budget, but at that time, the high-end broadcast networks shows were going for about $4 million an episode. So we were working, but we also didn't have a continuing cast who we had to pay more and more and more each time. And we were doing different people every episode, different casts. We had a limit to how much we would pay to bring actors in, and everybody was on an equal basis. You know, if you're coming from LA, you get this much, and no matter how famous you are. So it all worked out in that regard. But it was an amazing experience.
And as a big fan with a personal interest in Japanese horror, it was a delight to see Takashi Miike and then also to have Norio Tsuruta adapting a Koji Suzuki story. So I'm very interested as to how both of those came about, both Miike and Tsuruta.
I was a big fan of Audition, and we partnered with Karakawa in doing an episode. We said, you know, we want a Japanese episode, and my managers at the time, who were also producing, they had gotten a list of filmmakers, and they suggested to me Miike-san, and I said, "Are you kidding? If we can get him, that would be phenomenal." And when we did, what's interesting about Imprint is that only the lead actress and Billy Drago spoke English. Everybody else in the cast, every single actor, learned their lines phonetically. None of them spoke English except for those two actors. So that was, and I was on set for most of the shoot. And watching that happen was, they were phenomenal. A little hard to understand sometimes. And then when we went to a second, well, also Kadokawa released Imprint theatrically in a 68-minute version. The television version was 60 minutes. And then when we came back to do season 2, we went back to Kadokawa, and they offered up Norio Tsuruta. And I looked at his films and realized I'd seen some of them before, met with him, and he was great. And so, yeah, we had Dream Cruise shooting in Japan. And that was an amazing experience, being able to be on the set producing movies in Japan. It was a very otherworldly experience.
Yeah, and I love too that Suruta chose the Koji Suzuki story as the
Yeah,
episode, because then of course you've got the connection to The Ring and Darkwater and all these
yeah,
other rich Japanese horror films.
yeah. It was great. You know, I knew some Japanese horror, particularly the ones you just mentioned, but it also opened the door for a lot of new material for me, which I found fascinating and hope to be able to use in the future. So,
Yeah, I think the Masters of Horror has set the standard really for anthology horror series that I just keep hoping for a reprise. We want a third season, but I'm assuming from what Oh, I don't know. From your facial expression there, is there any possibility for a third season for the
I have
Masters?
always said I'd rather celebrate the 2 seasons we had than to bemoan the ones we didn't. But who knows? There may be something. I used to lock myself off to the possibility of there being more in the future, but I'm a little more open about it right now. And we'll leave it there.
That that is the best thing that we've heard so far during this podcast. That is very hopeful. And I mean, kind of talking about collaborations, and I don't know if this will go into something that actually we can't talk about, but I know that previously you said that you and Clive Barker were working on something, and I think it was
Yeah,
originally for Shudder, and then that didn't quite work out. But do
yeah.
you have
Unfortunately, we did write a pilot together for an anthology series based on new original stories that would have taken us back to the UK. And it didn't work out. There were political things going on at Shudder who didn't have much money, and this would not have been an inexpensive show. And when you've got Clive Barker and someone so unfiltered as he is, Shudder's kind of the only place you can go. And if they decided against doing it, it broke my heart, it broke Clive's heart, but there was no place else for us to go with it. You can't go to NBC with a Clive Barker balls to the wall pilot. We wrote the pilot in full together, and I love it. And it is so fucking nasty, but it's also wonderful. The characters are great. The storyline is great. It is so Clive Barker. And when you're working with Clive, you abandon yourself to his point of view. And that's a wonderful thing because he's such a great artist in every sense of the word. He's a brilliant painter as well as a great writer and thinker. So I don't think we're ever going to see that happen, but it would have been nice.
and kind of on that note, how do you deal with setbacks and passes from studios? And when is it time to reimagine and repitch? And when is it time to can a project and say, okay, well, we can't go forward with this one?
Well, you never give up, but you never stay the hamster in the hamster wheel. At a certain point, you just go, life's too short, let's move on. Ideas keep coming to you if you're a writer, if you're a creative person. You're constantly coming up with new ideas, and you're able to let things go, let them lapse. And sometimes they come running up behind you and bite you in the butt and say, hey, remember me? Let's do this. And then you take it out, or someone comes to you and says, I remember this project you had. What became of that? And then they come back to you. So you never know. I mean, I wrote a novel 20 years ago called Salome. Not 20 years ago, but 15 years ago. And just last year, we wrote a screenplay for it, and it is going out now as a feature film. It's a neo-noir. It's not a horror story. But it's something I've been dying to do ever since I wrote the book. But I wrote the book because sometimes things present themselves in a different medium than you expect. And it was more an internal project than I thought it was a film. And I would often write fiction in between television and film projects as a palate cleanser and to just think on another level. And now it seems like one of the most cinematic things I've written. So maybe we'll get the chance to turn it into a feature film. That's the hope. It's just going out now. People have been very enthusiastic about the script. So who knows? But that came from a book that I wrote because I didn't think it could be a screenplay. And now it's a screenplay, and we'll see. But, the first thing I wrote that got me attention, that got me hired on Amazing Stories, was a script called Uncle Willie. And it's a period piece set in the 50s, so it doesn't age. So it's never been made. Nobody's ever optioned or bought it. but you never know. I mean, it was 40 years ago, but you never know.
When you're writing something for the screen versus writing something for the page, what are the different challenges? And I mean, how do you approach each?
Well, for film, it requires a little more structure. Uh, Fiction is more freewheeling, and it's also more internal. You can write from within rather than having to write from without. You know, when you're writing a movie, you can convey through dialogue what you can't necessarily convey through quiet that you can in writing books. And I learned a great lesson from Richard Matheson when we were working on Amazing Stories together. He said, books are internal and film is external. And it was profound at the time, even though it was obvious, but it really is true. And I did an experiment when I did a movie called Riding the Bullet based on a Stephen King short story. It was only 30 pages long, but it inspired something in me about loss. I'd lost my brother and I'd lost my mom before I read this story. And I also thought that it was set in a time of change. It was set today, or the today of when that happened was written. 1999, King wrote the story. But I set the movie in 1969 because it was all about change and how the world made a choice that might not have been a good one, might have been a good or bad choice. Just like the lead character in the short story and in our movie had to make a choice, and it was a life and death choice. And I decided to experiment on trying to make King's internal words externalized by having the main character, there be two of him. He would talk to himself, and you'd see two of him, played by the same actor, on the screen together, having a conversation with one another that you could only put in a book in internal language. And otherwise, he'd be in a movie talking to himself, which would just, or you'd have voiceover, which I think is a real easy cop out unless you're doing a film noir or something where it's stylistically important. So it was an experiment in how to make the internal external for a movie. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. That's a movie that's too close to me to be able to judge it closely.
And I mean, on that basis, when an idea presents itself to you, do you know immediately whether this is more an external or an internal, or does it kind of require more exploration?
It, Usually, when I'm inspired to write something, I know the medium it's going to be. I'm in a mood to write a movie. No matter what the idea is, I'll know what I'm in the mood to do. And I know that if I'm writing it as a book, it's not going to be a paycheck because we know that unless you're in the upper echelon, if you're Stephen King or Clive Barker or someone like that, most novelists don't make their living doing that. So for some people, that would be a consideration. I'm going to write whatever I'm most motivated to do at this point in my life, and it's still usually a movie idea because that's how I've spent most of my life as a writer, is as a screenwriter. And my fiction writing, even though I started at 12 doing fiction, being a published author of fiction didn't happen until way late in my career.
And so, do you have numerous projects that you're working on simultaneously? I assume you have to, just because of the absolute body of work that you have, and also just being in the film and TV business where you always kind of need to be pitching and coming up with new ideas. But I'm
Well,
interested in, yes.
yeah, I mean, I'm not desperate to do it at this point in my career. I've been doing it a long time, and I love doing it, and that's why I do it now rather than to make a career out of it. I have a career, and I've had a career for decades now. But yeah, right now I've got 3 different projects I'm working on. 2 of them are feature films, and one of them is a television series. And all of them look like they could happen. And, I haven't produced anything. I've written, the pilot with Clive and a lot of things on spec. Because if there's a project I want to write, I'm not going to go out and pitch it. I'm just going to sit down where I am right now, Nice Sky Productions World Headquarters, and write the script without any interference. And then if they want to buy it, great. If they don't, that's fine as well. But I forget the point I was making. But yeah, having several projects going at the same time, you learn quickly which ones are drawing the most traction, and you devote more of your energy into the ones that look like they're going to happen. One of the 3 I just mentioned look like it's most likely to happen. One of them has not gone out yet to be pitched. One of them we've been trying to connect with movie stars and who have production companies that want to partner with us. And so we'll see. Right now, the TV show looks like it's gaining traction. And if that happens, I'll be very happy. I'll be very happy with any of them, frankly. Because I don't have to do things I don't want to do anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, you've certainly earned that right.
Well, it's just at a certain age,
Right.
do I really want to? I remember when we offered Roger Corman doing an episode of Masters of Horror. He said, do I want to be 80 years old and standing in the middle of a rainy Vancouver graveyard at 3 a.m? And the answer was no. So, I don't have that same consideration. I'm not there yet. But, a movie takes a year out of your life. And if it can't be something you can be excited about, it's not worth it to me.
Right. And having 3 projects on the go at once, what does a typical day or a typical week look like? I'm wondering how you structure your time. Is it a case of here's a few hours on this one, a few hours on the next one, or you're having blocks of time within the month, or what?
If I'm writing one project at a time. And right now, I'm in a waiting mode on these 3 projects. So the energy I'm putting into those is packaging things to present to different either studios or networks or actors or production companies or funding sources or whatever. And I'm not someone who likes to work with funding sources, so I usually work with producers who are good at that because I'm not. But I'm usually genuinely working on one project at a time. If I'm writing a script, I'm not writing 3 scripts. But writing comes easily to me. It's something I really enjoy. And even after all these years, I love sitting down and starting and typing. And it's something that I enjoy doing, I get excited about doing, and I'm fairly quick at. I enjoy the process, so it's not like work, and it's why I will write on spec rather than pitch and develop it. It's like, this is the script I want to write, and whether or not this is the script you want to buy is up to you after I'm done. But I don't want your input now. I'll take your input after you read it and decide you're interested or you're not. So.
And if you were starting out today and you were looking to break into screenwriting,
God help
what
me.
would you God help you. What would you do? Just pray.
Well, it's the most difficult thing, particularly as a screenwriter. It's easier in a way as a director because you have the tools to make films on your iPad, on your phone, you can make a really high quality movie on your iPhone and have high quality sound effects, and you can mix a surround sound mix and all of that. You can make a professional looking and sounding film. All you need are terrific actors and a terrific script. And then you have a showpiece that you can show to people. As a screenwriter, it's much more difficult because it's a matter of writing screenplays and then getting to agents who will see the value of your script. Whether they want to make that script or not, it might be a good sample that says, oh, they're looking for a writer for this project. Here, let me give you this screenplay, this work by this writer. But to be a screenwriter is to actually sit down and do the work, not to just think about it, not to just talk about it, not to just pitch it, not to come up with stories, but to actually show that you have the ability to write a screenplay that somebody wants to produce. And then it's to get an agent. And that's really difficult because every agent takes home 30 screenplays every weekend to read. And they might get 3 pages in and throw it aside. So you have to have something that shows that you can make these people want to turn to the next page and keep turning the page and keep them captivated and not lose their attention. And that's harder than it's ever been because they're also checking their messages, their emails, their texts. They got, an actor on the line or something. So it's harder than it's ever been, despite the fact that there are more platforms than there have ever been before. But how do you get seen and how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? Even as far as looking at streaming movies, you're looking at a page of thumbnails that how do I know what's good and what's bad? Maybe I can tell from Rotten Tomatoes, or maybe people are talking about it online, or maybe Fangoria is talking about it, or there's a screening at a festival that gets it some attention, and all of that sort of thing. So it's a really tough time. But I would venture to say it's even harder to make a go of it as a screenwriter than as a director because you do have those tools. People would rather watch a movie than read a movie.
Yeah, and on the note of Rotten Tomatoes, that can be distinctly unreliable too, because
Oh yeah,
unfortunately, as it is compiled by and it is the opinion of human beings can be deeply unreliable. So I've kind of got burnt before by seeing it's got a low rating, not watching it, and then circumstance has come around that I have seen the film and thought this is one of the best movies of that particular year.
well, that's the thing about it is it's an average, which means somebody liked it, somebody didn't, and it's really word of mouth is the best way to hear, or just discovery. You see something, go, this looks interesting. I haven't heard about this before. I'll give it a try. And I do that a lot. And 10 minutes in, I go, okay, next. but but then you'll find something and just, wow, this blew me away. So
I tend to look for things that are extremely polarizing to people because it
yeah,
made a reaction. And I'm like Michael, I don't trust people's, I think a lot of people are just very irresponsible and unreliable. But if something evoked a reaction, even if you hated it, I'm like suddenly very interested in seeing it
yeah.
because I don't trust you. I don't trust you, viewer, and you hated it, so that means I might like it. So
There's,
that gives it a better shot.
well, there's nothing worse than being average, is there?
Right. Exactly. Don't want to be average.
Yeah, well, I think, with a lot of the decisions you've made and collaborating with people like Clive Barker, there is no danger of being average. People are
No.
going to react for better
Yes.
or worse. They are going to give you a reaction. And
Great.
yeah,
Yeah, you see a movie like Sleepwalkers, you you either embrace it or you hate it. There's no like, oh, it was okay.
yeah, I rewatched it ahead of this conversation and it really does stand up today, and it is still absolutely batshit crazy.
Oh, thanks. And that's another one that every single review was terrible when it came out. They hated it.
See, the reason that I assumed that the reviews for Psycho 4 were good was because of how strongly and positively Stephen King reacted to it. But no, he was the lone voice, apparently.
Well, certainly in 1990, he was one of the few who reacted well. There were people who liked it, but not many critics who liked it. But it did lead to the most memorable bad review line I've ever received. Some reviewer, and I forget who it was, maybe by choice, said, Director Garris is to Hitchcock what Peoria is to Paris. So you may not know, Michael, but Peoria is a crappy small town in Illinois, and Paris is not. so,
Yeah. Oh my
so it's a
God.
very
Yeah.
clever line, but ouch.
Yeah. How, how did you react to that at the time? I mean,
Well,
a lot of people say, to ignore reviews, to try to let them wash over you, don't pay too much attention to them either way. However,
well,
strongly worded.
if your work is important to you, it's a part of you. And to insult somebody's work is to insult who they are. And if you're going to believe the good reviews, you have to believe some of the bad reviews as well. Reviews can be very painful, they can be instructive, but you also have to put them in the context of this is just somebody who writes about movies. He's never made one, he doesn't know what goes into it. And you shouldn't have to know what goes into it. You should only be judging by the finished film. But a lot of review, it's their opinion, and you have to respect that, whether you agree with it or not. But it's also just, as they say, just like an asshole. Everybody has an opinion.
That's it, yeah. So we touched on before you adapting The Shining, and I wonder, given that Stephen King had reacted so strongly against the Kubrick movie, was this perhaps some of the most pressure you have felt for adapting a movie, knowing that it was such a personal project for King himself?
Yes and no, because when I first saw The Shining, I had never read a book a scary book I thought was better. And when I saw Kubrick's film a couple days before it was released at a screening at Warner Brothers, I hated it. Now I think it's a great Kubrick film, but a terrible King adaptation. And King is warm, Kubrick's cold. And I think that's the big difference. And it was not the right match of material and filmmaker, unless you haven't read the book, and then, it's a masterwork. But King himself wrote the screenplay, so that took a lot of the pressure off. But secondly, it's the most comfortable production I've ever had. I've never had what I felt was to be sufficient budget before this miniseries. This was the first and only time I felt like we had enough money to make it the way we hoped to make it. It was enclosed, it had a small cast, there weren't many locations, and I was able to concentrate on the filmmaking and the subtleties of working with the cast, where it was going to go, planning. We were on the road for The Stand, which was a 460-page screenplay, and it's all across America. And we were constantly on the move, and there were locations that I'd never scouted before that this is where you're shooting. Okay, here we go. Here, we built sets. We were occupying the hotel for months on end. We were doing things in a more controlled way that allowed me to exercise whatever tools of filmmaking I had access to. So there was none of the creative pressure of, no, is this going to piss King off? Because King was there, and it was King's script from his book. And it was great. Like I said earlier, I've never had Stephen King tell me what he thought I should do as a filmmaker, but was always there to give me moral support. And working with Stephen King is the greatest collaboration any filmmaker could ever hope for. To actually have him there on the set, which he hasn't done in years. But it was one of the best shooting experiences of my life. I would say The Shining and Masters of Horror were probably the two best.
I never realized that and I guess I knew it in the back of my head, but the Stand script was 400 pages long.
Yeah, 460. Yeah. So
Jeez.
I
And you
came home
don't
one day.
think about it.
Yeah, I came home one day and there's this doorstop on my porch, and it's like, how long is this going to take to read? It took me a day, but yeah, it was a big fat one.
Yeah. I rewatched it last year, and I've seen it, golly, probably 10 times. And I will tell you that the first time I saw it was when it was on TV. And I was a young King fan and very, very skeptical. And all I can say is when those strains of Don't Fear the Reaper started playing, I knew I was in good hands.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
I was like, oh, okay. Okay.
I think there were a lot of doubters because television did not do well by horror. And
no, not at that time.
And the fact was, horror on TV was mostly made by the same directors who made the rom-coms and the sitcoms and the westerns and everything else. They were just directors, not directors who were passionate about the genre. And so I think that made a big difference to The Stand, because I was also not somebody who watched a lot of TV at that time. TV is better than movies now, but then there was a big difference. And I wanted to make movies, and I had made movies and had not done a lot of television. And so it was kind of, as Douglas Winter said, it was kind of a halfway between movie and television. So I did everything I could to make it as cinematic as possible and not take into consideration the size of the screen, because people watch movies on TV all the time. So what's the difference? I'm making a movie miniseries. So it may be on the small screen, but so are all the feature films that aired on television at that time also. And everybody loved the book. Everybody who worked on the movie, they were fans of the book, and they were excited about the opportunity to do this way. And I didn't realize what a heavy burden was on my shoulders, being one director for all 8 hours of the show. And King was there for probably half of the show. He was on location. And it was just an incredibly great experience, harder work than I've ever done in my life and ever want to do again. But it was a great, great experience in every way. It wasn't easy, but I learned so much and realized that I could take on some heavy lifting. And I don't want to lift that heavy anymore, but I'm glad I did it then. But that was a 100-day shoot. And, normally in miniseries in those days, they would do a different director for each of the 2 hours. But it was all on my back, and I loved it.
Wow. Yeah, I will say too that going in, it's like you had Gary Sinise and Ray Walston, who I grew up watching. Yeah. But I came out of that thing with a much greater appreciation for Rob Lowe, who I could not stand. And when I saw him in the cast, I'm like, well, there it is right there. That's going to be the one that breaks it.
Yeah.
And he knocked it out of the park.
He was great.
And I'm like, my God, he's... And I didn't know that. But,
yeah.
I mean, he just, his portrayal of Nick was just, I was like, wow, this is the guy can act. I was surprised.
Yeah, there were a lot of doubters, and he was pitched to play Larry Underwood. And I thought, that's so on the nose. If he would be interested in playing Nick, I would really find that more interesting. And when I suggested that, he totally committed to it.
Oh,
and he
wow.
was great. He was great. But I think a lot of people had the same skepticism you did. Rob Lowe and the Brat Pack,
Yeah, that's
Molly
where we were
Molly
coming off.
Ringwald and Rob Lowe. Nah, it's TV, TV, TV. But
Yeah,
it came from a different perspective, not from a TV perspective.
yeah, yeah. It was great.
Yeah, online was brand new then, AOL, and chat rooms and stuff. And when it was first announced, there were all these doubters. No, no, Stephen King with Molly Ringwald and Rob Lowe on television. Oh, it's going to be a piece of shit. And then it became the highest rated, most watched miniseries of all time.
Well, didn't Rob
Yeah.
Lowe commit so much that he volunteered to put things in his ears to actually appear deaf while doing
Yes,
it?
he's deaf in one ear, and he offered to put a bug in the other ear that would just be white noise. And I said, "That's great, Rob, but how would you hear my direction?" So, it also reminds me of the the quote from Laurence Olivier when they were doing Marathon Man, and Dustin Hoffman was going on and on and on about how he would approach the role from all of these esoteric artistic standards. And Olivier said, "What about acting, boy?" So that's kind of what I
Yeah.
jokingly said to Rob.
Uh, well, you got to appreciate the commitment, if not the practicality of the
Yeah,
suggestion, at
well,
least.
he was great, and he was a dream to work with.
And I mean, at that time when you were putting out, these television series, you also had the movie Quicksilver Highway,
Yeah,
which is almost, I mean, well, it is an anthology of a film, and
yeah.
that I do find that a bit of a underrated, a little hidden gem.
Oh, thank you. I love that little movie, and it originally was going to be a pilot for a series that I was asked to do a pilot for a series of ghost stories. And I said, well, what if I got a story from Clive Barker and turned that into a 1 hour pilot? And then once I did that, they said, can we make it a 2 hour movie instead and make it a backdoor pilot? And I said, let me see if I can get a story from Stephen King. And this was right after we did The Shining. We went right into production with Quicksilver Highway. And Fox TV did it, and they did not have a background of doing movies. They did series, but not television movies. So originally it was going to air as well, it did air as a television movie, but the series people never saw it, never considered it for a series, so it just got lost in the shuffle. But it aired the same week as The Shining aired, but they were made back to back. We'd made The Shining out of town in Colorado, and so when we got back to LA, I got together most of the same crew that were from LA, and we shot at home. We were able to go home to our own beds, and it was what I like to think of as a recreational horror film. It's just there to tell you a couple of fun stories. It's not got anything heavy on its mind, but it's very playful. And the wraparounds, I love Christopher Lloyd is so weird in it. And it was really fun to write these flowery purple prose speeches for him, and to actually be the writer adapting King and Barker myself. And that was a great playground for me as a writer as well.
Yeah, when did you first start working with Christopher Lloyd?
The first time, I didn't work with him, but I wrote an episode of Amazing Stories, and Christopher Lloyd was in that. So that's the first time I ever met him. It was Bob Zemeckis' episode. He directed it, but it was something I came up with the story with Tom McLaughlin, and we wrote the script together. And it was the classroom. I can't even remember now. It was 1986. So excuse me, 40 years of history. But that was the first time. Then the next time we worked together, where we actually worked together, was Quicksilver Highway, and then on Masters of Horror in Valerie on the Stairs, which he's fantastic in Valerie on the Stairs. And again, had some really difficult speeches that I wrote for him, but he nailed it. But it's funny when you're on a set and somebody's got a difficult speech, you can feel when they're having trouble remembering it. You know, if it's like 3 pages long, that's not an easy thing to memorize. And you just feel them struggling with it. And Chris, I would feel that in a couple of takes, but by the time it was take 3, he was just blasting through it.
Yeah, I think in both situations, I mean, you couldn't really imagine someone else playing the roles that Christopher Lloyd did. So
Yeah.
had you written them purposefully for him, or was it just a happy situation?
No, it was just a happy situation. After writing Valerie, I thought, wow, Chris Lloyd would be great for this. I wonder if he'll remember me. And I think he did. But, I know he wouldn't have remembered me from Amazing Stories because we didn't really work together. I was the writer and I was maybe on the set a couple of days or parts of a couple of days. But with Quicksilver Highway, we had a blast. When we're shooting the scene inside the trailer and he's eating those strawberries, he just kept eating strawberries, take after take after take. Thank God he wasn't allergic.
Yeah, otherwise it would be a different type of horror that we will be talking about right now.
Yeah, well, here comes the gurney.
Well, what habits or routines do you have or have you had that you think have made you a better writer and creative?
Just doing it, not making excuses not to do it. Um, a writer writes, and whether you're going to sell it or not, the more you write, the better you get at it. The more you shoot, the better you get at it, unless you start making shortcuts and go, oh, I did this last time, and it's something I want to use again. That there's nothing wrong with that, but if you just do it because it's easier, and a lot of people do that, and a lot of people, as their careers go for any length of time, often get lazy, and it's hard work directing a film, and it's easy to go, let's do it the easy way, rather than put your balls on the chopping block. And that's a painful thought. But as far as writing goes, I always write in the morning. After I get up, I have my breakfast, I read the paper. I'll write like six or 7 pages before lunch, so that I can come back and only write 3 or 4 to do a 10-page day. And just do it. I'm not writing at the present, but in the last year, I've written a couple of specs and the pilot script with Clive. That might have been more than a year ago. But, a couple of treatments. And, it's just every muscle you exercise gets stronger. So it's just a matter of doing it and not making excuses. And to not take the easy way out. I think taking challenges and not to be fearless. Like I said before, to be a good writer is to be fearless and to allow yourself to explore what's inside of you, whether it's comfortable or not. And as a filmmaker, you're using different tools, but to achieve the same goal. And I think fearlessness and this is really important that I learned early on, is to not be talked out of an idea because you think the people talking you out of it have more knowledge and experience than you. Know when the ideas on the outside are coming because they want to make it easier or because that's how it's been done before. But also know when their ideas are better than yours. To not give up an idea because somebody talks you out of it, but because you genuinely know that idea might not have worked. Trust your instincts unless there's a good reason not to. Don't follow your ego, follow what's best for the project, you know, to not just say, well, I know better than you do. You may, but you may not. And it depends on where those suggestions come from. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes not so much.
Yeah, I think being fearless and also knowing when to trust your own intuition, it can be a little harder early on, especially if you perceive that there's somebody a little bit higher up the ladder. But as you say, looking at, well, why are they doing it? If it's for financial or commercial rather than creative considerations, then
Well,
yeah, you
also,
might.
somebody's going to make a suggestion based on what's been done before, on what's been successful before. But if your script is one of those 30 that the agent takes home to read, and it's just like what's gone before, it's going to be in the trash pile. You know, it's not going to be the one that makes him go write a note. Okay, contact this guy on Monday. Um, you want to do something that stands out. You want to do something, even if it's not going to get made, something that'll get attention. Like, whoa, I've never read this before, and with a style, and grammar counts, spelling and grammar count. When I'm producing and I'm reading people's material, if it feels like somebody never went to school, I just like it's unprofessional, and professionalism counts.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, when we're talking about these different ways of approaching film and approaching writing, and when you're looking for, okay, is this something I authentically believe in? How does one know? It's kind of a esoteric question, but how does one know when it's kind of coming from your own soul, and how do you know when you're being kind of set astray by other external forces?
Well, you can only write what you write. And I think your intuition guides you. I think intuition in an artist is a very important element that people don't give enough attention to. Um, you know, I never sit down and think, okay, this is my 3 act structure. I'm going to write. This is Act One. This is Act Two. This is Act Three. I've never done that in my life. But I could sit down with any script I've written and go, okay, this is Act One, this is Act Two, and this is Act Three, because my intuition took me there. I watch a lot of movies. I don't think about structure, but I'm a storyteller. And so there is a certain structure to cinematic storytelling. Um, and there are people who are great at it, and knowing the rules allows you to break the rules. If you break the rules on purpose, that's great. If you break the rules because you don't know any better, sometimes it shows. And that can also be great too. There are terrific writers who've never read a book on screenwriting or writing of any kind, who just come out of the womb with a good command of the language and a good command of storytelling. And that's great. But there are ways to learn to be better. And one of the ways is to just keep doing it. The more you do, the better you get.
Well, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Well, kind of to blindly stumble forward the way that I did when I was 18 years old, because I was 18 and I was singing in a rock and roll band, a prog rock band, all original songs. And we opened for some major acts. We opened for the Kinks, and we opened for some other people, and all of that. So I wasn't thinking so much about that. But till after the band broke up, I started thinking about screenwriting because I love movies. But the best advice is embrace the passion of movies. If that's your passion, you're going to be watching all the movies you can, and you're going to be doing as much practice as you can. I wrote a bunch of screenplays before anybody ever hired me, but that's what I was doing. I didn't know I would ever make a living doing that. I didn't even know that it was possible to make a living doing that. But I was lucky enough. I was doing publicity for The Fog, and I was hired by Avco Embassy to write a screenplay for a project called The Philadelphia Experiment. They made the movie years later, not from my script, and I got no credit on it, which was fine because they changed it completely. But I, I was around movies. I got jobs doing specialized publicity in horror movies and science fiction movies. And just whatever job I could get working close to the medium I wanted to be working in, I knew I could learn something from. And I hired myself to do making of documentaries, and because I was a lot cheaper than the vendors who were doing it for the studios I worked at. And I learned how to put pieces of film together to make sense, to make a narrative in documentary form. And I did the making of The Howling, and I did the making of The Fog, and I did the making of Goonies and Gremlins and The Thing. And I learned about making movies by watching movie makers make movies.
How did you specifically go about hiring yourself for the making of that? That's an amazing detail.
Well, because nobody was going to pay for it at the studio, it would cost $90,000 to do an electronic press kit, an EPK as they call it. And I had a job doing specialized publicity on the genre films at Avco Embassy and then later at Universal, dealing with the magazines that existed then, the Fangorias and Starlogs and things like that. There were a bunch of other ones as well. There was no online yet. And I would say, look, for $3,000 or $5,000 or $9,000, I will take a camera, hire a camera guy in Vancouver and a sound guy, and we'll go up and shoot the making of The Thing. And so that was within the budget to do that, rather than the $90,000 that they weren't going to spend. So they were there, sure, go ahead. And I did, and it worked. And, doing Gremlins was like, geez, I'm interviewing Steven Spielberg, I'm interviewing Joe Dante, I'm interviewing Hoyt Axton, and I'm interviewing Chris Wayless and all these people, It was great.
Yeah, suddenly when you're only charging 10% of what it would cost to bring someone else in, it makes more sense as to why the pitch of hiring yourself,
Exactly.
yeah. And you mentioned your prog rock band. Great name, the Horsefeathers Quintet.
Well,
And
it was not called the Horsefeathers Quintet. Somebody put that in an article somewhere, and everybody's called it that since.
It's not true then.
It's just Horsefeathers.
Why did they add quintet?
Because there were 5 of us, and somebody probably said he was a singer in a quintet called Horsefeathers, and so
Right.
it's the Horsefeathers Quintet. It was always just called Horsefeathers, but somebody somewhere referred to it as the Horsefeathers Quintet. Quintet never should have been capitalized, and,
Right.
But yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Now that that's cleared up.
Well, I want to know. I mean, because I understand that you're inspired by the likes of Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, and
Right,
so
and Gentle Giant, and Yes, and
yeah,
CFM, and all of these people. I was a huge prog rock fan. And the band didn't start out as a prog rock band. We were kind of a country rock band. But the people in the band were more adventurous musically than that and started drawing in other inspirations. And our primary composer, a guy named Bill Burney, never listened to any of other music. And he had the most unique musical mind I know. My wife is also a composer and works in very much the same way, and composes in a very quirky, non-traditional way. And so the band became more proggy as we went along, even though there was no term such as progressive rock in those days. But that's what we were. We played complicated music, with the exception that where most bands like Yes and ELP, not so much ELP, but a lot of other prog rock bands, were very serious, we were very playful. we would play complicated music that was also funny. And I was a bit of a ham on stage and a goofball. And I'm much better mannered these days. But yeah,
Is that
it was a great time.
yeah, is there anywhere that we can hear the Horsefeathers that is a quintet, but
There
is not
is.
called the Horsefeathers Quintet?
After decades after we recorded them, we took a bunch of our best demos from the 70s and did some overlays of new vocals and new instrumentation. And a few years ago, we put out our first ever CD called Symphony for a Million Mice. And it is streaming on Apple Music, on Spotify, on Google Play. It's on every one of the music sources. So the album is Symphony for a Million Mice by Horsefeathers, and it's out there. So, and it turned out really well. It doesn't sound like it was recorded in the 70s.
Well, that is going to be streaming right into my ears a few minutes after we finish this
Well, if you're a prog
conversation.
rock fan, and it gets pretty silly as well sometimes,
Yeah,
hopefully in a good way.
no, I can't wait. I look forward to it. And so, I mean, you alluded to at the start of this conversation that you have a number of future projects coming up. Are there any projects that you have coming up in the future that you can talk about or you can tell us about?
Well, none of these projects have been greenlit yet. So it's premature to talk about any of them. Um, one of them is fairly close, but it's just probably a couple of weeks too early. So we can do an addendum in a couple of weeks if you want.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, and
It'll be,
I'll
hey, Michael,
certainly.
Bob, you know that thing we were talking about? Well, here it is. Or it's like, you know that thing we were talking about? Dead in the water, just like the Clive project. Yeah. So hopefully not.
Yeah, I mean, I've said to other people before because I mean, at the moment, I've started working in film, particularly trying to get some of my books adapted. But it's such a roller coaster of a kind of experience because you can have these moments where you're pitching to studios. It's really exciting. You feel like this could happen, and then you get the email. Oh no, they passed, or
Yeah.
oh, this has happened, that has happened.
It happens to
Actually, there's
everybody. It happens to John Carpenter. It happens to me.
yeah,
It happens to, you know, everyone, unless you are the hot guy of the moment. Guillermo del Toro is going to make whatever he wants to make. And, there are a handful of other people like that. But it's not an easy road to hoe. And, I haven't shot anything since Nightmare Cinema several years ago. So you just never know. And that's the lowest budget I've ever worked on. It was like a bunch of people getting together and say, come on, let's make our own show. And it turned out way better than anybody would have told us it would. So, not success, it was not a hit or a financial success, but we made a movie that we are all proud of.
yeah. And I mean, I think that makes it a success in itself. It
Yeah,
makes it a creative success. I mean, of course, we'd like financial success as well, if possible. But
yeah.
there's
But
something
it's
to
the
be
wrong
said.
reason to go into it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, creative satisfaction is ultimately what when it's all said and done, we want.
Yeah, and everybody does the occasional thing for financial reasons. I've done a couple of things that I probably would not go. Oh, this is something I really want to do. That for maybe a mixture of right and wrong reasons. But overall, I can look back on the things I've done so far and be able to say I have no regrets.
Well,
I hope I can say that the day before I die.
I, yeah, yeah. I mean that's kind of what we all hope. for ourselves, not everyone hopes Mick
Yeah,
Garris can say that before he. Wow, that's a bizarre universal hope that the world has.
I
I've been
like it.
thinking it my whole life, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Anytime.
Well, where can our listeners and viewers connect with you?
I'm on Facebook under my own name and under Postmortem with Mick Garris. I'm on everything. Kind of, it's Postmortem or Postmortem with Mick Garris or Mick Garris Postmortem, that sort of thing. Even though I don't have Postmortem going anymore, that's something that might come back too as a YouTube show. So we'll see. That's something that I did not expect that somebody came to me about. So we'll see what happens. It would go hand in hand with one of the other projects.
I love that you've hinted at the possibility of Masters of Horror. If
No,
anyone
I
picks this up,
hinted nothing.
I'm the one who said that. Nobody.
You hinted at it, not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we've got Postmortem. So what a way to start and finish the show. And
Full
I
circle.
mean, on that note, do you have any final thoughts to leave everyone with?
Well, just gratefulness, Gratitude is something that I experience every day. I've been very lucky in my life, personally and professionally, and it couldn't happen without an audience. So, well, professionally, my personal life could gladly happen without an audience, but and so I'm just grateful to the genre and to the fans and to being one of the fans and having the opportunity to tell stories that people want to see.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me. It was great to see you and sit with you.